change it by a very tiny amount when it's very far away. By the time it gets to the Earth, it's going to miss by a lot. That's the key.
China hasn't done anything like this before, so it's important that China also try and make sure it has that capability.
China doing it alone is not possible.
Most importantly, the benefit is to learn how the composition, the behavior of these things when they're hit.
We do have a booming commercial sector which is looking into this.
International collaboration is absolutely essential to solving this issue. And I believe China could actually take global leadership here.
The Chat Lounge. Chat Lounge.
Chat Lounge.
The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Welcome to the Chat Lounge. I'm Tu Yun. China is preparing for its first ever planetary defense mission by sending a spacecraft to crash into an asteroid and deliberately push it off course. China aims to join the United States as the only nations to demonstrate this technology. Joining me for a chat on this topic, Xu Yansong, the Director General of the Asia-Pacific Space Cooperation Organization, Professor Quentin Parker, the Director of the Lab for Space Research, University of Hong Kong, and Dr. Zhang Fan, an Associate Professor of Astronomy with Beijing Normal University. A warm welcome to you all. So let me start with Professor Zhang here in Beijing. The U.S. already successfully tested asteroid defense in 2022, that's 3 years ago, by crashing a spacecraft into one, which means humanity already has the ability to protect itself. So why does China also need to try?
Right. In terms of defending the planet, the more the better. So, for example, the main aim of the U.S. mission called START, Double Asteroid Redirection Test, is to measure how much a collision, direct kinetic collision, can alter the orbit of an asteroid. And in real threat situations, if, say, the U.S. hit it once, and it turns out it's insufficient to deflect the asteroid away from Earth, then somebody better be ready to do the second one. And in terms of space-faring nations, China is a major one, so it needs to have that capability. And unfortunately, a lot of the technologies are not being shared, although the science part of it is mostly shared in open publications. For example, if you want to hit the asteroid and deliver enough of an impact, you really need to hit it at tens of kilometers per second. So it's a bit different from other missions where you try to land on it. You get close to the object and then you go around it, and it's a gradual process. For this one, it's a direct hit from deep in space. So it's a slightly different set of technologies. And China hasn't done anything like this before. So it's important that China also sort of try it and make sure it has that capability just in case you need more than one shot or something like that.
From your perspective, it's an explanation from the technical perspective, but some observers argue it's more about the space race than saving Earth. Your take?
Well, it demonstrates a lot of capabilities. Being able to hit something very far deep in space with extremely high velocity, obviously, you can imagine what kind of other uses that could have. So in terms of space races, I can imagine why people would think that's important. But really, I don't think knowing the people involved in planning this thing has been planned for a long, long time. I don't think that, space race is at the back of their mind at all.
All right, Mr. Xu, you're from the Asia-Pacific Space Cooperation Organization. What's your take here?
I think there are two ways we have to consider this asteroid danger, because there are interplanetary threatenings of asteroids that is having impact threatenings to Earth, and also we have in the international community we call it planetary quarantine, because some of the asteroids or some of the asteroid bodies might have some other disease or infectious items from outer space. So we have to make sure that these derail of the uncooperating body asteroid should be duplicated and should be also redundant in addition to the U.S. effort. We know there are many ways to do this. One is the kinetic way of using impact. The other way is, of course, to fix the chemical propulsion system on board the asteroid if it's a bigger size. We have the right observation, right modelings, make sure the trajectory is correct calculations, and then we have to do it as early as possible so that we use less effort to make more impact.
All right. And Professor Parker, though you're now working at the University of Hong Kong, you're originally from Australia. So from your perspective, to what extent do you agree with this statement that it's more about the space race?
Certain parts of the world like to couch everything in terms of a competition or a race. I think China, for me, I've been at Hong Kong U for over 10 years now. I think China's just getting on with its own national priorities in space exploration. And this is one of them to demonstrate a capability to deflect an asteroid for planetary protection. I mean, going back to the DART mission, if I may, I mean, that was interesting because if you look at the close-up imagery of that, many people think of asteroids, they think of solid rock. This is actually just a rubble pile. You know, the Didymos encounter is basically an agglomeration. It's a loosely combined agglomerate that's come together under gravity, perhaps picking bits and pieces up over billions of years until it's formed this small asteroid. You could probably punch through it. You know, it's not a solid body. And so when you had that impact, it's actually, you got extra events happening. You get the whole shape of the thing change because it is not a solid thing. It didn't break into thousands, millions of different particles and broken into smithereens. It kind of just sort of lost its shape and reorientated itself from this rubble pile. But so that's one thing. You also got an extra kick as a result of that impact. So it didn't behave the way they expected, but it did change the orbit. And that's the most important thing. And as Xu Yansong said, the thing about threats near Earth crossing asteroids is what they're called. And that's when they have a probability that they may impact the Earth. Now, people shouldn't be worried. You know, the thing that killed the dinosaurs that happened 65 million years ago is a 1 in 100 million year event. You know, that's an extinction level event for everything on our planet. But, you know, the thing that we're talking about here, only a few tens of meters, we're talking about a Tunguska level event. You know, it happened in 1908, but that did flatten 2,000 square kilometers. So if that happened to hit a largely populated area around Beijing or Shanghai or New York or somewhere like that, the cost would be incalculable. So it's still worth trying to defend our planet from such impacts. And of course, the further away you can find them and you've got their orbit very accurately, it's called an ephemeris, you get that orbit extremely accurately, then you can work out how much you need to change it by so it misses Earth by a lot. You change it by a very tiny amount when it's very far away. By the time it gets to the Earth, it's going to miss by a lot. And so that's the key, you know, being able to deflect or change the orbital period and change the orbital inclination, even by a very tiny amount, can have a major impact in terms of it missing the Earth.
You talked about its cost. You said it could be incalculable. So economically speaking, is asteroid defense worth the massive investment? Do you have any idea how much it would cost, especially for China?
It's called insurance, basically. You know, you insure your car from an accident, and the chance of it having an accident are actually reasonably high over a lifetime of your car. You know, if you're flying in a plane, your chances of having an accident in the plane are extremely low. It's a very, very highly safe method of transport, but you still have airplane crashes. And similarly here, you know, you're paying insurance to stop something devastating from happening. Unlike an airplane crash, a few hundred people die, or a car crash, maybe one or two people die. If you have a Tunguska level event, tens of millions of people could die, you know, and you could destroy a city with everything in it. Every piece of infrastructure, every building could go if it happened to hit a major city. So it's that level of calculation you need to do. You can look at the level of, you know, a 90-meter asteroid, of which there are a large number out there. And if we detect one of them on an Earth crossing orbit and its impact probability is quite high, we would try to deflect it. We should, because if it does hit, I mean, it could go into the ocean. If it does that, it creates a tsunami, and that can devastate coastal communities all around the world. If it hits on the ground and goes to a populated area in China or America or somewhere else in Europe, you're talking about massive trillions of dollars of devastation. So yes, in my mind, we should be doing something like this. And if we have the technology and the political will and the finance to do it, then we should. If we don't do it and it's too late to do anything about it when we find that something's going to hit, we just have to accept eventually millions and millions of people will die.
Yeah, all in all, it's worth it. Life comes first. But in terms of the target of this test, Chinese scientists reportedly chose a harmless asteroid system that poses no threat to Earth. But last year, a 100-meter wide asteroid, namely asteroid 2024 YR4, was found to have a chance of colliding with Earth in 2032. 2. That's in 7 years' time. So since the UN's Space Mission Planning Advisory Group, comprising countries with space programs, including China, have been meeting regularly to discuss a response. So people are asking, why not just choose this asteroid? Professor Zhang?
Well, you need to be able to get there first. So this one, both the DART mission and this one, the asteroid is about 10 million kilometers away.
Right.
But this one, if I remember correctly, it's on its way out. So you're chasing after something going out at extremely fast speed. So it might not give you the kind of impact you'll be able to achieve. In any case, this 2024 YR4, the thing about this is currently you calculate to have 1 or 2% chance of colliding, but that prediction is not very accurate because solar system has a lot of bodies. When you have more than 3 bodies in your system, it's chaotic, which means when it goes all around the solar system, come back in 7 years' time, its orbit is it's going to be fairly different from what's being predicted. And what we really need to know is the chance of collision at that time. So right now, it's important in the sense that it went through a threshold for the UN coordination mechanism to kick in. So it's good for testing the system, but really the chance of collision, the number doesn't really mean much. Incidentally, this is why you want to have a global collaboration in terms of monitoring this thing. You want to catch them as soon as they slingshot around the last major celestial body that they're going to encounter. And that's when the orbit is almost accurately fixed. And then you can go out and try to deflect it.
Okay.
So that particular target is far from that stage yet.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Mr. Shi, do you have a different interpretation of that?
I think Professor Zhang is quite right on the engineering side because we need to have the competence and capability to reach to a far object. In the meantime, I think in the coming 5 to 10 years, asteroid study is combined with this global threat and the protection, as well as space mining. We know a lot of countries are making legislations allowing this to happen. For example, Luxembourg has made laws for space mining legal at national level because we need to have international laws to study the outer space as a global community. But some of the countries are making effort to do this. One thing is good because it's having technology development and validations for study some asteroid and outer space bodies. And this is one thing that we can make preparation for technical capabilities. In the future, maybe we can work together with nations with this competence, and then we can have a coalition of combined effort to do this more efficiently. And because the Earth is rotating, so every 120 degrees, we will have observation systems to establish so that we can have 24/7 observation capabilities. All of these would need global effort. I think the current process of space mining and study of asteroid, uncooperating body maneuvering, these are very good attempts so that make technical preparations for future political decisions.
Right. You are from a space cooperation organization and talking about this probability of cooperation, but we'll dive deeper into that, whether we can realize international cooperation on this later on. But
if I may come in then on that previous point about asteroid 2024 YR4 and the scare stories about its impact of being a couple of percent. Well, when they studied it a little longer and they got a much better ephemeris for the orbit, means a more accurate orbit determination, they realized its chance of impact was vanishingly small. So that whole issue went away, actually. And the point about, 3 body systems, well, we're in billions of body systems in our solar system with the asteroid belt and all these small bodies and things like that. And yet we know that asteroids and comets come around regularly, like Halley's Comet will come back again. We know its orbit and it's relatively stable. So, it's true that bodies can be affected by the gravity of other celestial bodies around them, especially the big gas giants, when there's a confluence of gravity vectors across a part of the orbit, and then it can change the orbit. Yeah. And this does happen. But a lot of objects, you can rely on them, and you just update their ephemerises through observation. And so when they got more accurate information, it's quite small body, it's only 80, 90 meters, they're able to determine that its chance of impact was vanishingly small, and so it went away. So it was scary for a while. Then as you got better data, it was no longer scary, although it now has a greater probability of actually crashing into the moon than it does the Earth. But anyway, never mind about that. On the asteroid mining side, although it's a bit of a digression from our main topic, I'm not a fan of that. I mean, their companies have come and gone in large sums of money, lost on companies that went bankrupt because we're decades or century away from really any kind of serious mining of commercially useful asteroids. I mean, talk about, oh, they're worth trillions of dollars. Well, as soon as you bring $1 trillion full of gold or metal asteroid to the Earth, then the market for that metal disappears because suddenly it becomes almost worthless because you've got so much of it. So these are the kind of thinking, that we need to get across in reality.
That's
about
true.
what things actually are.
The mission is actually reported scheduled to launch before 2030 and possibly as early as 2027. Professor Zhang, does China have all the necessary technology and conditions to achieve this?
Yeah, I think so. So just this year, China launched Tianwen-2 mission, which is the asteroid sample return mission. It's slightly different in terms of the final approach, but getting there and all the navigation and propulsion is basically very similar to the technology. So China can certainly get there. And then once you get there, the last stage of approach, you try to hit it. So China is pretty good in terms of, for example, think about space station, automatic docking mechanism and stuff like that. So China has a whole host of alternative technologies for achieving that kind of final approach. So I think China does have that capability, certainly before 2030. That's a long time off.
Given the country's other space missions, including landing astronauts on the moon by 2030, then would there be any resource allocation conflict during this period, especially given, that the economic environment or situation of this country?
Right. So in terms of the cost, although it sounds like it's a really huge science fiction-y thing, it doesn't actually cost that much. The U.S. mission, the DART mission, costed something like $300 million. If you compare that to, how much Elon Musk earns in a year, it's not that expensive.
That's true.
You're not sending an enormous spaceship into space and trying to fight the asteroid. You're basically shooting up a fridge up there, and it accelerates very slowly over a very long distance until they hit something like 6 kilograms. So it's not superly expensive. And in terms of resource competition, before 2030, obviously the most important space acceleration for China is manned lunar landing program. But if you follow the recent progress, so that's been going rather well. So things the prototypes are being built and tested, and they're performing as expected. So I don't expect there to be a large drag in terms of manpower, in terms of facilities being sort of dragged away to redo, and the things that needed for lunar landing. So all in all, I think there will be sufficient spare resource for this mission. And given how important it is in terms of defending the planet, the cost-return ratio is it just justifies giving it some resources at least.
Fair enough. And in terms of the methods China is going to use, plans involves fly along, impact, fly along. So Professor Parker, can you explain to us in simple terms how that works and why this method was chosen?
Well, the method was, what it works is it means you've got a spacecraft that approaches the target asteroid and monitors it and examines it and reports back on its characteristics and everything like that. Its real size and its surface morphology and densities and all those kinds of things. Then you have the impactor coming at great speed, a kinetic impactor that then hits that body. And then the fly-along satellite that's a monitoring and then looks at the impact of that, the immediate and post-impact situation of that event and reports back all the data it can on that. So that's why. So you've got a sort of monitoring satellite that's kind of around the around the asteroid target and then looking at what happens before and after that event. So that's why they're doing it that way, because we can learn so much more from doing it that way.
All right, but there are also other ways to stop asteroids, like a nuclear blast.
So as I mentioned, Yeah, by Professor Xu Yansong, is that that this is one way. The darts did that, and impact is a way of getting an immediate effect on the body. You can, as I said, attach another spacecraft to the asteroid, which will have some kind of thruster on it, some solid fuel ion thruster, whatever it is, to gradually over time exert an impulse force on the body to change its orbit. That takes time, but it can be just as effective. It depends, really. I mean, there's different kinds of technology. You can also use continuous laser ablation technologies, impact technologies, even, bombs, explosive devices rather than just kinetic impact. Although it's the energy there that's you can have more of an impact from both the kinetic energy of a bomb and the bomb exploding itself and just a kinetic impact on its own. But the only things that have been tried have been the DART. So this is the follow-up in a way to the DART mission. I mean, I'm not sure what this kind of asteroid is, whether it's a solid body asteroid or another rubble pile, and that'll have a big effect on the way that this experiment will unfold.
And what would be its biggest advantage when compared to other solutions, like you mentioned?
Oh, no other solutions have been tried. So, I mean, it's hypothetical. I think it might happen.
Most obvious one.
Yeah, the actual technology and the physics of it are quite well understood. So, we expect it would work. You attach a thruster to the body, and then it expends its fuel over a period of time. And then we know how much thrust can come out. We know the size of the body, its volume, density, etc., mass, and therefore you can expect a certain change over time to occur. That's just simple physics. So you just apply that, and we predict based on our knowledge of physics what's going to happen. So that's a fairly predictable process, assuming that you can tie down some of the variables, which are things like, the consistency of the body, its true mass and density, the orbit is very accurate, and where you attach the thruster and how much thrust over how long, and et cetera, et cetera. So, these are calculations, but, a kinetic impact is a one-off event.
So it's most conservative or most guaranteed method, Mr. Xu. You agree?
Yeah, I think we have seen a lot of missions from European side and Japanese side.
Right.
Japan has conducted 2 missions, which is called Hayabusa. Their Hayabusa 1 and Hayabusa 2 is to study the asteroid and even take samples back and land in Australia. And
but
also
that's over 10 years ago.
Yeah, that was over 10 years ago. That means that we can approach the asteroid and we can get something from it and we can bring it back. And based on those technologies, we're capable of maneuvering uncooperating bodies in microgravity environment. As Mr. Parker mentioned about putting a propulsion system on the asteroid, whether it's a solid or a pile of stones, that also is very challenging because if you want to put propulsion, you have to also have attitude control. Otherwise, the asteroid will tumble, will be out of control once you start the burning of the engine. So you have to have a complete system to do that, and to make sure that you put the engine at the right place or even multiple engines to control the attitude so that you don't run out of control with the asteroid. And also kinetic is one way. But we're talking about close proximity avoidance and diversion of the orbit or the trajectory, if you call it, so that in early stage we can nudge it and we can put it away from the harmful way to the Earth. So protecting purpose, this will be relatively easy, but whether we need international collaboration in this, I'm a firm believer that we do have to work together in the international community so that we can identify and make a joint effort together.
Yes,
we know there.
Yeah,
we know there are many accessible technologies involved, but this is for global peace.
Right. I mean, what they did with the Japanese version, it's 10 years ago. So over the past decade, haven't we developed anything more advanced or superior, or that's what Chinese?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, every nation have their national focus, as Professor Zhang mentioned. We're investing heavily on the lunar exploration and Mars exploration. Once you have dedicated resource to those efforts, you don't dedicate too much on the asteroid studies. Of course, we know that these studies are for the expansion of our understanding of the universe, and this is very important to our knowledge and also in the future. The scientific objectives of the 10-year ago Hayabusa mission and the Rosetta mission in Europe is quite different from where we're talking today about this asteroid diverting mission. So we have quite different purpose to this effort. And also we don't have this urgency of doing this as quickly as possible. So we're doing it in a pace of combining exploration with asteroid missions, even space mining, so that in the future, once we have this urgency of protecting the Earth, we will work together with engineering capabilities we accumulated, like you said, past 10 years or in the coming 5 or 10 years.
This has been the Chat Lounge. When we come back, check out the risks and benefits of the planetary defense mission. Stay with us.
The strong wind was howling and whistling.
He was the first Chinese citizen to graduate from Yale University in the mid-19th century.
I was born on the 17th of November. She had prominent features. 3 of us were old enough to lend a helping hand.
He navigated between 2 vastly different cultures and moved further to realize his dream and promote understanding between the people of China and the United States.
Ye Mingxing was a native of Hanyang. I realized no danger. China is really awakening.
Come and join us in discovering the incredible journey of Yong Wang in his autobiography, My Life in China and America. Check out the Audible stories on radio.cgtn.com and all major podcast platforms. Just search for the podcast Books and Beyond and find My Life in China and America.
Welcome back to the Chat Lounge. We continue our chat on China's plan to carry out asteroid defense system test. Let's move on to its risks and benefits, although you've already touched upon this a little bit, but some people worry, the collision could create dangerous debris or add to space junk, which is, I think it's quite a common concern. Is that a big concern this time, Professor Parker?
Yeah, thank you for that. Dangerous debris or space junk. Now, those two terms I associate with orbital satellite debris in low Earth orbit principally, although not exclusively. That's where the biggest threat is to the ecosystem.
Right.
And a space junk is man-made objects mainly. We don't call asteroids space junk. They're natural phenomena from our own solar system. They can create dangerous debris fields. I mean, every year we get the Orionids and the Geminids and the Taurid meteor showers, which are associated with ancient comets and things of that nature. And they sometimes can create problems depending on the intensity of the path that the Earth goes through at that time. So, and if these things are far away in the solar system, then there's no danger. It's only dangerous if we believe that it's an Earth-crossing asteroid with an impact probability that's more than a few percent. Once it gets to 1% or 2%, then you start to get very concerned. And then you have to start to worry about, we need to really get the orbit really accurately. Is it really a few percent? Or as we saw with 2024 YR4, it actually ended up being not a threat at all once we got a better orbit. So let's get the orbital data. Let's get the, as much information about these potentially dangerous Earth-crossing asteroids as we can. And then if we find out that one of them is a serious threat, then we have to act. Okay, how much time do we have? Some of these objects come in so quickly, we haven't even discovered them until they've gone past us. And we realize, wow, that was a 50-meter object. If that had hit the Earth, that could have devastated a city. So sometimes we only find out after the fact that we had a close encounter. So it's all about mapping them as well. So we have, telescopes around the world that have been dedicated to try to find these near-Earth objects for decades, actually. I was a group in Australia where I was, and they were working next to my telescope on trying to track and find these near-Earth asteroids. So that's an ongoing program. The more international collaboration we have with that, the better. Sharing data, sharing orbits, sharing information. It's always better to collaborate when there's a big task to do. It's not usually the purview of a single country when you have so much to do, and you need telescopes around the world operating 24 hours a day, as it were, in terms of coverage. I mean, obviously it's night and day at different times. That's why we need telescopes around the Earth to monitor the sky continuously, and that's obviously not in one country. That's in many different countries. So we need cooperation. International cooperation, as has been mentioned before, is really, really important here. We need to put aside our geopolitics and our national priorities for international global protection. And that's something that bodies like the United Nations have been trying to do, like the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. APSCO has a role to play because it's international. It needs to expand its portfolio of countries and organizations, and other bodies too that can be involved. But basically, we need high-level geopolitical agreement that this is a global threat and it's interests of the whole of humanity to try to do something about it.
Right. Professor Zhang, your take here?
In terms of the risk and benefit, Professor Parker really summarized quite well. It's really, really far away.
nowhere near Earth, and most of the traffic is near Earth. That's where the debris is the problem. Way up there, there's nobody around, and space is really big, so there's no debris problem. No matter what happens, the total direction from which you hit the asteroid is pretty determined. So it's not going to nudge it in the opposite way. The way they designed it is after the collision, so this asteroid, whatever minute opportunity it had or colliding with Earth before, afterwards, that probability is further reduced. So I believe in the next 100 years or so, you're not going to collide with Earth. So that's a minuscule additional benefit of doing this mission. But most importantly, the benefit is to learn how the composition, the behavior of these things when they're hit. That many of the alternatives, for example, going there and towing it, using gravity to deflect it. The reason why they proposed is people were worried that if the asteroid is like a rubble, it's just a bunch of rock very loosely sort of connected together. Then, as Professor Parker mentioned very early on, you hit just directly with the kinetic impact, which is the easiest and most direct way of nutting it, that your bullet may actually just go through and do nothing. If that happens, then you're going to have to do the other thing. But the U.S. mission actually showed, despite the thing being a rubble, it's mostly an explosion that causes the material to vaporize and push in the other direction, so it pushes the asteroid in the other way. The same mechanism for if you use the nuke. The nuke is not there to break up the asteroid, it's there to cause some material to go the other way, being evaporate. Anyway, so that mission shows the kinetic impact does work, even if it's rubble. And the Chinese mission, if this time by a different type of asteroid, also shows similar behavior, then it's good news for us, right? We don't need to all this very complicated, slow, indirect way of trying to deflect it and hit it. So that's the most important thing we're going to learn through this mission.
Right. Mr. Xu?
Yeah, I think there are two layers of this issue, and one is I'm not a astronomic physics, but I know that the solar system has its own protection system. We have our sun, which has the biggest gravity, and that can swing around all the asteroids around it. And also we have the planet Jupiter, which is the biggest planet in our solar system. And the planet itself can protect a lot of asteroids from coming into Earth. And also we have the third layer, which is the moon. And the moon, you can see from its surface, it's been bombarded by asteroids. So we know the moon has a protection function to the Earth. And also we, at the final layer, which is the atmosphere, which has a good protection of asteroid. Once it's enter into the atmosphere, it will burn up. In particular, smaller ones, asteroids, will burn up and consume in the atmosphere. As you said, there's also a commercial side, flip side on this issue. And we see that the international community has many companies do have this effort, in particular in Europe, of space mining. We know that the asteroids are not always a pile of stones. Maybe some of them have precious stones and even have gold on it. So we do have a booming commercial sector which is looking into this. And in China, we have more than 30 companies have already started developing their launch vehicles, not to mention small satellite companies. We have companies that has launched more than 120 satellites into orbit by a single company. And most of them, of course, are Earth observation. But slowly, they're diverting their attention to more space exploration missions like the lunar and Mars mission. And in the future, there's a possibility of international community working on the space mining in particular and study of asteroid. And all of this will be developing in the coming 5 years. If you look back 5 years ago, the commercial space in China is almost zero, but now it's hundreds and thousands of companies are working on launchers, on satellites, on technologies, on applications, on navigations, on individual technologies. So we should also take full advantage of these developments in the commercial sectors, in particular for technology validations and for redundancies and for backup plans in the future. So the commercial is doing very well. It's doing some of the government works and functions, and we should also encourage them to work together.
Yeah, that sounds quite encouraging, but there's one aspect which just sounds not so positive. That is the collaboration issue. Professor Parker and Mr. Xu have already talked a lot about how important international collaboration in this field is. But given what's going on in geopolitics in the world, especially, the tense U.S.-China relations. How likely is it for teamwork to happen, over the next decade or a few years? We've seen already, NASA begin barring Chinese nationals with valid visas from joining its programs. It's not a good sign, right, Mr. Xu?
I've been working on the ISECG as a member. ISECG stands for International Space Exploration Working Group. That comprises of 14 countries, including US, Russia, and most of European countries and China. And in that effort, we studied the possibility of working together on asteroid missions, on lunar missions, and on incorporating asteroid maneuverabilities. So all of these has been studied. But coming down to realistic political scenarios, we know there are relationships that breaks up and come together again. Some say that U.S.-China relation is like a marriage. Sometimes you fight and sometimes you get together and get along. But we understand that the U.S. has a policy of bilateral restrictions, but on multilateral fora, they're quite open, in particular for global coordinations and issues. For example, the IADC, or Interagency Space Debris Working Group. This is fully open for participation of all spacefaring nations. And we know that the space debris, in connection also along with asteroid threatenings to the Earth, is another global issue. So on the multilateral fora, we are quite optimistic that we can work together, in particular on this global effort. So I'm still fully confident that once we build a platform, and in addition to the UN platform, we know that in the coming 3 weeks, we will have also IAC conference, International Astronautical Congress. And this is also another occasion that we can talk and we can work together and see all the possibilities. So I'm quite optimistic.
Professor Parker, how optimistic are you that, teamwork is going to take place in this regard? I know we can't stress enough on international collaboration, but how likely is it?
There are some various factors at play here, which I think are relevant.
Right.
The one is that America itself, it's not just about what it's doing geopolitically externally, it's about what it's doing to itself internally with how it's changing priorities at NASA, significantly reducing the NASA budget in terms of many of its programs, and also across science, across universities. So there's a big change going on. There's been quite a lot of articles out in a recent week or two about, the way that America seems at this stage to be stepping back from global leadership in much of science, including in space. I know there's stories coming out about, NASA's chance of getting to the moon with SpaceX and its amazing rocket is receding, and that China is now looking more likely to perhaps put man back on the moon first. You've got that playing out, but then you've got the way that existential threats tend to focus minds. And I think one of the biggest existential threats, apart from, of course, life being obliterated by a major asteroidal impact on the Earth, like happened with the dinosaurs, but, that probability is 1 in 100 million. But, that event was 65 million years ago. So we're due for another one at some point. But all that aside, the threat to human modern life is from the Kessler syndrome and the destruction of low Earth orbit, into which most of the major satellites are now being placed. There's tens of thousands of them planned, and there's more than 15,000 up there. And if Kessler syndrome happens, which could some modeling could start within 10 years from today, it's game over. It means that, the way we are running our lives with our mobile phones and our banking and our trading and the marketplace and all this instantaneous communications technology we all rely on almost disappears over a period of about a week as the Kessler syndrome unfolds. So that's a really major threat to trillions of dollars of global economy. And it's in everybody's interest, not just every spacefaring nation, but all the nations of the world that rely on the technologies that our satellites provide in terms of data that needs to be protected. And I think that's really going to focus things. And that's why international collaboration is absolutely essential to solving this issue. You have groups like the Three Countries Trusted Broker Group of people from America, China, and Russia collaborating about this and trying to see what we can do to solve the problem. Most of the debris up there was created by America and Russia, not by China. China's only been a relative newcomer in the last 20 years to space debris, but it's actually taken it seriously And I believe China could actually take global leadership here, both in terms of the technology that it can implement and in terms of taking leadership role in getting collaborations going on this. But it is absolutely essential that it happens. If it doesn't happen, it will it will affect everybody.
I bet everybody understands this very well. It's just whether there is any political will
All
to
talk.
do this.
It's talk. Where's the action?
That's true.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
So, Professor Zhang, are you personally engaged in any collaborative programs or project with your U.S., European, or Japanese, peers, or any positive news that you can share with us here?
Right. In terms of science, especially in astronomy, the good thing is a lot of times the political side of things, people either don't understand or don't care about what we're doing. So we just collaborate on the download. For example, whenever a telescope discovers something important, for example, an asteroid that may hit Earth, they will publicize that information openly. So anybody across the world can follow up using their own telescope and then they can contribute. They can put their own information in the same database systems. So there's a global collaboration and scientific effort already ongoing that's relatively undisrupted at the moment. So hopefully, building on top of that, because the planetary defense has a slightly different tone to it, because it involves large-scale collaboration, a sort of coordination that often involve governmental agencies like NASA, ESA, and United Nations. So it's a little bit more. So if you have the bottom layer of telescope basically there, you also have some middle layer individual countries in terms of actually putting everybody together. UN, as we discussed earlier, there was a mechanism for sharing information, and that was triggered by the 2024 YR4. So that mechanism does exist, and it is currently working okay. Hopefully it stays that way. So all in all, at the moment, things are okay. We just hope that when we are actually facing potential dangerous actions, more substantial actions are not hindered by any further political issue.
Indeed. Probably we cannot have immediate cooperation with your U.S. colleagues there, but at least we can learn, from their previous experience, the DART mission. So I think some of you already talked a little bit about the lessons that we can learn, but Professor Zhang, your take here, lessons, be it scientific or technical or strategic, that China can take away from the U.S. Mission?
Right. The most important thing is you got to do this kind of experiment. You cannot simulate. You cannot predict what would happen. As Professor Parker mentioned earlier, people are expecting the way the U.S. mission was trying to measure how much the impact of the kinetic hit would be is to hit a more moon of another asteroid. So by observing how the period of that rotation of the moon changes, it sees how the speed has been changed. And people expecting just a few minutes, and it turns out you can do 30-some minutes. So that's fantastic news. From that's very encouraging result. And that comes from purely having to go out there. Nobody was expecting it from a theoretical point of view. So that lesson, just from the scientific point of view, you got to go there and try. And also the fact that it comes out positive means this disconnecting method does work. Worst case, you probably put some nuclear warhead on top of it, and then this method will probably continue to work. And then what next to do, China is doing, is to continue to refine this method to test out some different type of asteroid, testing out, study more thoroughly. For example, the whole process of putting another satellite this time that's orbiting, studying the whole impact very carefully at to the detail that you learn from this kind of experiment. So in my view, this is the continuation of effort that the Americans started. Obviously not the continuation of the political setup, but in terms of the scientific output, it just keep adding stuff. And hopefully in the future, other people would add even more.
And one thing I think I came across is that while DART succeeded, the amount of debris kicked up was far greater than expected. So, Professor Parker, I'm not sure if you can elaborate a little bit on this and whether, or your suggestion probably for China, how China can manage that better.
Well, I mean, this is the whole point about the unpredictability. You don't know what you're encountering to actually get there and look at it up close. And when they got close to the body, it wasn't a solid asteroidal body. It was an agglomeration, rubble pile, effectively under loose gravity. We had, lots of large numbers of individual smaller objects combined together into what looks like an asteroid, but it's actually just a fairly loosely bound gravitationally itself. And so when you impact it, you ended up with a lot more material because it's much more fragile in the sense of not being a coherent solid, but actually just a pile of rubble that's easier to dissolve, as it were. And this is why the shape changed significantly afterwards. You now got a more elongated melon-type sized object, they believe, from subsequent analysis and observation compared to what it was originally. And that's because it's like come back together again under its very weak gravity and formed a new shape from what didn't get, spread out and went into lots of different orbits. So yes, if it had been a solid asteroidal body that was impacted, it would have a very different outcome. And so this is one of the big lessons from this mission is, what happens depends on what you encounter and what kind of body it actually is and what it's made of. And you don't really know that apart from in a crude way until you have to get up close and personal to the body and make more fundamental observations of its physical nature and characteristics. And so that's what was different. And that's why some of the results were a bit unexpected. But the good news, as has been mentioned, was that, the orbital period changed by 32 minutes. And that's sufficient to have quite a large impact over time on where it would actually impact. And so the whole point of this is when you're far enough away from the Earth, you only need a small amount of change to make that body miss the Earth. But the closer it gets to the Earth, the more energy, the more effort, the more difficult it is to change that object, to make it not hit the Earth. The more warning you have, the better, which is why actually hunting and finding these things and then refining their orbits so you know which objects are really of a threat and which are not, and you just concentrate on those ones. That's the key.
China's space missions are known for being reliable, but how big is but there is also could be some exception. How big is the chance that something unexpected could still happen, for this test?
All the time. I mean, as I said earlier, some bodies which are can be dangerous. If they're more than a few tens of meters in size, they're incredibly dangerous. But objects a few tens of meters in size are very, very hard to spot. It depends on their albedo. It depends on where they're coming from, how fast they're moving, and all these kinds of things make it difficult to track such tiny objects. But, and in fact, as I said, sometimes they find them after they've actually missed the Earth and gone past. They say, whoa, look at that. But, it's already gone past the Earth. Thank God it missed, kind of thing. So, yes, it is important to have a global network of very sensitive near-Earth asteroid tracking facilities with all the data shared between the countries that operate those facilities. If we can do that, then we have a better chance of finding these things and finding out about the orbits and finding which ones are dangerous and doing something about them before they become dangerous.
Is it possible that China will have to do all this all alone?
Cannot, because you can't monitor the sky from one country. You only get to see it. You can only look at the sky when it's dark at night or when it's not cloudy, and it's often quite cloudy in parts of China. So you need a global telescope network, doing the same job, tasked to look and hunt for these things. And these things are kind of happening. There is collaboration and cooperation. But, in terms of space debris alone, I mean, we're not sharing all the data we should be. Different jurisdictions are measuring things in slightly different ways. They've got their own databases, but are not being shared. So I think this global collaboration, which we've all talked about, is super important in ensuring that we have the best chance for all of these things. It's through sharing data, sharing expertise, coming together as a planet to protect the planet.
That's, again, in an idealistic world. But Mr. Xu, how confident are you in China's, this mission? And if I'm saying in the worst scenario, can China do it alone?
Well, CNSA is currently establishing an organization called the Zhang Center. That center previously launched satellites into orbit, but currently has assumed this responsibility. I think they have now started preparations. China doing it alone is not possible. We need the data, because if you see the stars in the evening, the southern hemisphere and northern hemisphere have different skies and different galaxies. We don't see the other side and the flip side of the coin. So we need global data and collections. And I think one of the important things is that we not only, in addition to observations and modelings, we need to also have capability of proximity observation capabilities. Mr. Parker mentioned about whether it's a gravel or it's a stone. We know that the asteroid made to Earth are mostly iron or solid metal or solid status, and they can experience the combustion in the atmosphere, and they are more dangerous. Gravels don't make it to the Earth's surface that easily, because it will be teared up by gravity of different planets and the solar system. Once it's closer to the Earth, it will be disintegrate. So what we are focusing on more is on the solid status asteroid. And I think we do need to have collaborations on study of that. We need to also develop capabilities of cross-proximity observations and even study of the status of the asteroid, so that we can make due preparations for those who are creating a real threat to the Earth. And I think a coalition of a collaborative effort in the international community, not only in the observatories, in the data banks, but also in the government development and commercial development sector, should also work together, would be much more easier for a single country to tackle a global issue.
Last but not least, Professor Zhang, do you agree? It seems that they are questioning the capability of Chinese scientists.
So obviously, in terms of monitoring, so China is launching 2 spacecraft. One of them is going to be staying close to the asteroid and do the monitoring of the kicked up material, all the close up things. And then a lot of telescopes on the ground will be doing the monitoring of orbit change, for example. And that really benefits from having more coverage from across the globe. Without that, you can still do the mission. What's going to come out of the collaboration, scientific output of having put in same amount of money, same amount of effort, will be much less. So it's not a fatal problem, but it is a really sort of a diminishing return kind of situation, which is why this concept is around for a long time. If you look at the previous publications by, for example, the Deep Space Laboratory situated in Hebei, they have that on their brochures for a long time. It caught the attention of the media because it was known just a few days ago on an international conference, and the reason why they're announcing it is precisely to solicit for the international collaboration, not only in terms of monitoring, but also in terms of possible payload development and also data sharing in the end. So the data analysis, in terms of understanding the chemistry, the geophysics and everything, the finding is such that there's only a few people in the world that are expert in very specific things. China doesn't have all of them, obviously. No country does. And having the capability to share information and get back minds together to analyze the same data is also quite important. So there are different levels of collaboration, and the data analysis part is obviously easier. So I guess the conclusion is, without the international collaboration at all, the mission can still go ahead with diminished scientific returns. With a low level of return, a low level of collaboration, you would already massively boost the return, and then you have high level ones, then it's maximize return. So that's the story.
Right, consensus reached. Let's hope for the best and prepare for the worst. There is some cliche. And on that note, we wrap up our chat. Many thanks to Dr. Zhang Fan, Associate Professor of Astronomy, Beijing Normal University. Xu Yansong, Director General, Asia Pacific Space Cooperation Organization, and Professor Quentin Parker, Director, Lab for Space Research, University of Hong Kong, for your time and insights. You can find us on all major podcast platforms. Please email us your comments at radio@cgtn.com. I'm Tian. Join us for more insights at the Chat Lounge next week. Until then, take care.
Sideline Story brings you all things sports related. The hottest topics, latest events, juiciest stories, all with a very personal take. Subscribe to Sideline Story Podcast for heated sports discussions covering events that are happening in China and around the world.
Dive into news like never before with Deep Dive, the podcast from CGTN Radio. Join our global reporters for captivating stories and thought-provoking conversations. Search Deep Dive on your favorite podcast platforms and get ready to dive in.